Okay, it is 3 o'clock. Hello again. Thank you all for joining our session, Different Lenses, Same Glasses, a peer-led panel discussion bringing clarity to pathways of healing and recovery in our communities. My name is Kristen Rivera, she, they. I'm here as a moderator and facilitator for our discussion. Before we begin, I just have a couple housekeeping things. First, this will be a panel about lived experience and navigating recovery. Please feel free to take time and space for yourself during our conversation. And we also encourage everyone to engage in our panel. So please feel free to use our chat box feature, and we'll have a Q&A time at the end. And then lastly, there are some surveys about this session. Please feel free to submit those and tell us your thoughts about how we did and what we could do better. Okay, so without further ado, I'd like to introduce our panelists for this afternoon. We can start with Joy.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining. My name is Joy Binion, and I am here representing On Our Own of Maryland. It is an organization in the state of Maryland. Mostly we do training for those going through their peer recovery certification. I am with the Anti-Stigma Project. So specifically, we do anti-stigma training and we do it for behavioral health. And our definition of behavioral health is mental health as well as substance use disorders. I also work on the side. I'm a board member for NAMI, the National Alliance of Mental Illness for Baltimore metropolitan area. I'm a mental health advocate. I'm a former federal employee, so my entire career has been in health education. I often now work along families in crisis. I run support groups and I also do a lot of education. I have a certification in trauma support and crisis intervention. So, what brought me here to the field of mental health is that my daughter, who is now 18, has an SMI, which is a serious mental illness. She has major depression with psychotic features, which means that if she is too depressed, she goes into psychosis. So for the past 4 years, my daughter has been hospitalized 10 times. A couple of those hospitalizations were for extreme self-harm. A couple were for psychosis. An example, she would get paranoid or she would act very impulsively, and she's ran out into the highway like 695 here in Maryland a couple of times, or she'll do like extreme self-harm. I'm sorry if I have to say that there might be some trigger warnings to, to some of the stuff that I'm saying, giving background about my daughter. But yeah, she does a very extreme self-harm. And then a couple of her hospitalizations have been for actual suicide attempts. So that is what leads me here today. Right now, I do workshops on how to be a trauma-informed caregiver. My daughter's other diagnoses are OCD, PTSD. Oh, there's and a major anxiety. I knew there was one more. So that is me, and that is my background. Thank you.
Thank you, Joy. We're so grateful to have you here in our space today. And I'll pass it to Shannon. Please introduce yourself and kind of share what brings you here today.
Yeah, hi everyone. Thank you all so much for being here. I'm Shannon Pagden. I use she and they pronouns. I'm currently a PhD student at the University of Pittsburgh in the School of Social Work. My background is primarily in peer support. I was a peer supporter for many years, still kind of informally peer support, but still nationally certified and really always lots of respect and love for the peer support space. As far as what brings me here today, so I have a diagnosis of schizophrenia. I received that when I turned 18. So at this point, I've lived with that diagnosis for many years. I also have diagnoses of PTSD and ADHD since young childhood. And I kind of at the time I first started experiencing psychosis, and in the years following, I think, as probably most folks would not be surprised hearing, I experienced tremendous amounts of stigma from loved ones, from people in my life, and so I'm really kind of passionate about how we can do better with that. I, have been involved with kind of some stigma work in the research space and in the advocacy space, and it's something that I think about a lot and am excited to talk to everybody about a bit more. So great to connect with you all, and thanks for being here again.
Thank you so much, Shannon. Grateful to have you here in our space. A little bit about me. I'm also a peer, so someone who's navigated and currently navigating mental health systems. I also have some experience in the peer support realm, love working with youth and young adults on their recovery journeys. And now I'm kind of expanding into the research fields as a lived experience consultant, helping to guide research that is really trying to better engage and support this type of population, right? People with serious mental health conditions and system experiences. Awesome. So we'll dive into our first question um, for this discussion. So, in your experiences, how would you define stigma, and how does stigma impact the recovery of maybe yourself, community members, and loved ones that may be experiencing mental health and substance use?
I, I can go first. So we at the Anti-Stigma Project define stigma as we have a really specific definition for stigma, and that's predetermined attitudes or beliefs regarding an individual or group which disempower, devalue the individual, and undermine relationships. And so when we talk about that definition, we really kind of key on some of the key words, which is disempower and devalue. So if you're a person and you're stigmatized, especially in the behavioral health field, that's exactly what it does. Stigma is painful. Stigma is permanent. It could be worn like a scar. And stigma oftentimes feels like a punishment, right? And I was in the conference so far when we're talking about HIV, and actually HIV is actually my background. And there was a lot of there's a lot of stigma with HIV, and punishment is one of the main ways that community felt like people made them feel like you got this disease as a punishment. So that is how we define stigma in the behavioral health field. It's has been extremely hard. We're doing better, but we can also do better. I first would like to say we all stigmatize, and we have all been stigmatized ourselves. And the reason is because we judge. There is nothing wrong with judging. We have to do judgments every single day in our life, right? No one has the time to sit down and critically think about every single decision that they have to make. Prejudgment is predetermined, right? This is what we use in our stigma definition, is judging without the facts. You have no facts at all, and you're coming to a whole conclusion. This conference has used the word labels a lot, and stigmatize when you label somebody, it could be stigmatizing. I typically say, with labels come fables, meaning that if you have a label on you, there's usually a narrative that goes along with it. But the issue with labels is that it reduces a person to one characteristic. It strips away the complexities of people. And in the realm of behavioral health, what it does is it reduces somebody to a behavior that they've had possibly in a crisis or possibly at their worst moment of life, right? And once you get those labels, it's very hard to shake. Now, what does this do? When people know that they could be stigmatized or they could be judged, um, it could defer them for seeking treatment. In the behavioral health space, we call it the decade of silence, and the reason why is because research has shown that a lot of people don't get treatment until about 10 years after they first started noticing the symptoms. A lot of that is due to stigma because no one wants to be called crazy. No one wants to be called a drunk. No one wants to be called a crackhead or an addict, right? So when people hear this, then they also could do internalized stigma, right? They said, oh, well, I might as well not get help. I might as well not do anything or be anything in my life because I'm just a addict. I'm just a, somebody with schizophrenia. So, that is the issue with stigma. What I have come to see is that I love peers. So I love people. I love people like Shannon. And that's why I got into working with On Our Own in Maryland because we do a lot of the education for peer recovery specialists. What I found is that storytelling is really great. But what I tell people is mental illness is just that. It is a illness. It is not a character flaw. It is not a moral weakness. It is not a moral failing. And that is how it's often treated because depression could look like laziness, right? Having an anger problem or being emotionally dysregulated could look like defiance. In my case, I was punishing my daughter because she wasn't going to school. I didn't realize that she had severe anxiety, that she had severe depression. So I had to, step back and ask the question, what could be going on. But a lot of time that's really hard to do. Also, when I started sharing with people that my daughter had a mental illness, this is after her second hospitalizations, I was lying to people because I didn't feel like I had to justify. What happens is when I said my daughter's depressed, the first response was, well, why? She has a great life. You all live in a great house. She has two parents. So then I was put in the position of I had to justify my daughter's depression. So then I stopped telling people that I just stopped telling people. I used to lie. It used to be embarrassing for me and for her to know that she was self-harming, and that is what stigma caused. But when I finally said, "Hey, family members, the last two times she wasn't at Thanksgiving is because she was hospitalized. She's not at Thanksgiving this year is because she's hospitalized." That's when one family member said, "Oh, really? This is my cousin. Oh, my brother has schizophrenia." I was like, "What?" And then I started talking to other people, and then I realized, oh, okay, so schizophrenia, schizoaffective disorder, and bipolar completely run in my family. So, that is what stigma could do. When someone's acting out, when someone's very angry, when someone's health self-harming, they could look as rebellious. They could be looked at as ungrateful. But I tend to encourage people to peel back the layer of the onion. There could be a deeper issue. When I told my mother my daughter was hospitalized, her response to me was, "Oh, we need to get her into church. That's a demon." When I told her she had psychosis, the psychosis was a demon. And we need to pray that out. We need to start praying harder, right? So these are the types of responses that I get, and nobody wants to be. I mean, and my response to her was, "Would you tell your friend who has cancer that? Would you tell her she has a demon in her?" And most of the time, The answer is no. And so I said, okay, if you're not going to say that to somebody who has a physical illness, then let's not say that to somebody who has a mental illness. So that's what I have to say on stigma. I will like to say that um again, we've all stigmatized people and we've all been stigmatized ourselves. There are many things that we are taught growing up. Get over it, walk it off. Let's not talk about it. Let's
And
sweep it let's sweep it under the rug. But I try to challenge those, like when you sweep stuff under the rug, don't be surprised later on when you trip over that rug that you swept everything under. So that is my experience. I would like to say mental illness is more prevalent than we think. 1 in 5 adults have it. It's running a little bit more rapidly with our youth. I don't think social media is helping at all.
no,
I
it's not.
also don't think that people understand that your environment and your experiences could add to your mental illness. I usually say with mental illness, genetics loads the gun and environment pulls the trigger, which means that mental illness is caused by a combination of genetics, brain chemistry, and then your environment, right? A lot of people that I know with mental illness, and then I also used to work at the federal government, and we did a study. A lot of people with schizophrenia, with borderline personality disorder, um, with PTSD, trauma has happened. Like you had the genetics laying dormant, but then you have that environmental factor. You have trauma that kind of opens the door, right? And I tell people trauma is not what happens to you, it's what happens inside of you as a result of what happens to you. That's why 10 different people can go through the exact same thing, but it's the interpretation that matters, right? And have completely different interpretations of it. And then some people are also more sensitive than others, more genetically prone to mental illness. Bipolar, schizophrenia, schizoaffective disorder, all of those have a genetic component. I think ADHD does too. And then some of them could be environmental. If you're raised with a depressed mother, a father who is uh, uh, addicted to alcohol, then you're more likely to be depressed just because that was the environment that you were raised in. So um, a lot with stigma, and I know Shannon's going to speak soon, but I work with a lot of people with schizophrenia, and the number, and Shannon could speak on this, but the number one stigma that I hear from them is that they're violent. If the number one thing that I hear for my people when they are diagnosed with bipolar is that if they get mad, people say, "Oh, is that your bipolar acting up?" you know, comments like that. So go ahead, Shannon.
Yes, I've gotten that so many times. Absolutely. And yeah, Joy, thank you so much. I don't know that I would add too much as far as like definition of stigma goes. I think that was so wonderfully said. I think the only thing I would add is kind of like in addition to like self-stigma that folks might experience, there's also kind of like contending with public stigma and structural stigma often with diagnoses like this. So just kind of like different levels that it can operate at. But I mostly want to spend my time just talking a bit about kind of like my own experiences with mental ill health and what that meant and how kind of stigma showed up and has shown up in different ways. Because I think one of the big things was, when I was first diagnosed, I think like many people, and probably increasingly so even now, I went home and I Googled the diagnosis of schizophrenia. And I will say that is not a great thing to do for one's mental health. It is extremely reinforcing of stigma. And it basically just makes you think, oh, my life is over. Like that's it. It's done. Here I am at 18 and that's it. So I think that that was something that was really tricky to navigate at the time. I also grew up in a rural area, and so there were a huge, massive lack of resources in that area. I was sent to a lot of substance use centers, despite endorsing not using substances, because I think that that was kind of the only thing that they could offer. Um, but the main thing that I really experienced at that time was losing all but two of my friends. Like I had quite a large friend group in high school, and I lost everybody after my diagnosis. And granted, I was absolutely experiencing psychosis. I was talking to myself. I was definitely not sleeping. I was having a break from consensus reality, however we want to kind of conceptualize that. But I think in a diagnosis that was already leading to a lot of isolation, it really reinforced that for me. And certainly really reinforced self stigma, right? After going home and Googling my diagnosis and being like, oh, my life is over. And it's simply reinforced because nobody wants to be with me anyway. And so I think that all was something that, like, for a number of years was really distressing, and contributed to a lot of feelings of depression and really low self-worth. And I have said to friends of mine since that you can actually see it in somebody's face when you self-disclose and they feel differently about you. Like there's absolutely a change in somebody's expression, and I have witnessed that a lot of times where I kind of will self-disclose and mention, my diagnosis, and you can just tell somebody feels differently about you. And that really hurts. Like it's something that, is of course out of your control. Um, and I think with a diagnosis, like schizophrenia, a lot of what we focus on is kind of removal of people from environment. And I think that that often um, can really, again, like lead to just more isolation and more kind of ideas of stigma for somebody. I know for myself, like, I was removed from campus in high school. I was told I could not go back on campus. And that's really distressing. It's not a fun thing to hear. And I think that removal from community is personally not, in my opinion, going to be the thing that is typically healing for people. It's going to be about staying in community and staying connected to your loved ones and the people that you want to be around. So I think that that's something to like absolutely kind of bear in mind and think about when it comes to diagnoses like psychosis. Um, and I would say like the stigma that I've experienced has definitely changed over time, but I have continued to experience it in different ways over the years. Like when I started to get more involved in advocacy, I moved to New York and got very involved in advocacy in that space. And similarly, I started to kind of public speak, and when I would disclose, I got so many questions about violence. Oh, are you violent? I was like, that's such an odd question to ask somebody. Um, or a lot of questions. There's still a lot of belief that recovery is not possible with something like schizophrenia. I'm surprised by how much I still hear that. There can be a lot of dismissiveness from
Manda.
providers. This is something I still experience actually quite a lot because I appear outwardly at least to be somebody that's pretty high functioning much of the time, and I've had providers tell me, oh, you must have been misdiagnosed because you can hold a conversation with me. And nobody who's actively hearing voices could hold a conversation with me. And I think that there are just these really deep seated beliefs that people have about psychosis being very external all the time, or being something that, somebody just has to be kind of, again, like externally presenting as quote unquote psychotic. And the vast majority of people I know with psychosis do not present that way, right? So I think that that's just something that another thing that we're kind of contending with and thinking about. Um, but also just around kind of expectations, because I heard the same thing from my providers, right? oh, you will not go to college. You should not focus on being in a relationship. You'll take meds for the rest of your life. Yay, like, you'll be kind of semi-functional. And I think like that came from providers first. My mom and I, like, we at the time did not have much experience with mental health, and that was nobody in community but the providers that I initially saw. So I think again, like um, something that's still very present. Um, and then I would also say one that's been more recent for me is about 3 years ago. I got off of antipsychotic medication because it wasn't, taking away voices. And that surprisingly has been very stigmatized, I would say, both in kind of the community of, not taking meds, or also it's a very contentious thing one way or the other, whether or not one is or is not on antipsychotic medication. And again, particularly from providers, I will talk to my psychiatrist and said, yes, I hear voices. Yes, they sometimes cause me distress, but that's actually like not what I want to focus on. And immediately it's, oh, you need to go back on antipsychotic medication. And that's still kind of like the very prevalent belief around what would be the most like therapeutic or helpful thing. And then I would just
So I
say
can lay down.
publicly, um, perception of stigma has a really tremendous impact on kind of individuals and of course how we exist in the world. And I think like how public perception of diagnose of schizophrenia, for example, has gotten worse over time. It's gone down for other diagnoses, and for psychosis it has gotten a bit worse. And I think that that has a tremendous impact around people wanting to be in treatment, accepting diagnoses, or perception of kind of like, the need for something like forced or involuntary treatment for people with psychosis and schizophrenia. So I think that's all just something, that's worth saying. And I guess the last thing I would say, just to cut myself short, because I know I'm saying a lot of different things, is we all very likely know somebody living with SMI and we just don't know it. And I think that that is something I think about all the time. I'm like, everybody knows somebody that's living with SMI, and literally we just don't know it because typically people don't always disclose that, right? Because it's hard to disclose. And I think that that is I don't know, something that when it comes to stigma, I think about all the time, because I do think, similarly to Joy's point, like it's much more common than we think it is. And I think that it's, much more a part of all of our lives than we realize it is.
Kristen, can I add to what Shannon said? Can I add something to what Shannon said?
Yes, please.
Right. First of all, somebody in the chat said about sweeping it under the rug, and so to your point, I agree.
That's
Um,
good.
I'm always doing if I'm talking, a lot of times I'm going to throw out statistics and studies, but studies show that especially with psychosis, the more you ignore it, the more you sweep it under the rug, the worse it's going to get. I keep telling people, I was like,
Hey, come here.
can you can everyone please mute?
Oh, my music.
Please mute. Thank you. Thank you. So I keep telling people that when you ignore it, a lot of people will say, "Oh, she'll get better. Oh, they'll grow out of this." Yeah, mental illness is not something. I promise you, it's not something you grow out of. Also, to Shannon's point, you can have a mental illness but be mentally well. What I mean by that is you are managing however works for you. Managing does not have to be taking medication. But if you're managing your mental illness, examples are you found the coping skills that work for you, you've engaged in care, to Shannon's point, you've engaged in community, because you do need community. I don't think anybody could be on the healing or recovery journey alone. Um, and you are self aware. you have built we call it distress tolerance. You have built a tolerance for all your triggers, right? You're aware of your triggers. So you can have a mental illness and manage it very well. Another thing to Shanna's point was many people with schizophrenia or any type of mental illness, the statistics show that they're more likely to be a victim of a serious crime or violence versus being the perpetrator. And I know that's not what you might see in the media, but that is what the stats show. They're more likely to be a victim of a violent crime. So I just wanted to say that I will note that there is a clinic in California full of people with either schizophrenia, schizoaffective disorder, or some type of psychosis where they do not take medication. They learn to live with the voices. They learn to ignore the voices. They learn to make a background noise. Some of them, including my daughter, has a psychiatric service dog where if your hallucination is you're seeing people, the service dog, if they're, if they run into somebody, if the service dog doesn't greet them, then they'll know that that person is not real. So there's different ways to manage your disease, and there's different forms of treatment. And I've seen a lot of people with mental illness um, who are living well. That's what I wanted to say.
Thank you both so much, Shannon and Joy. I really appreciate you being brave, not only with sharing about your personal experiences, right, navigating new diagnoses, being a caregiver and a parent, helping your child navigate their experiences. And I think it's really inspiring to hear how what some might consider a struggle or pain, how that really motivated you to turn it into a passion, right? Now you're both kind of entering this career workforce, not only as a job, but really as an advocate, right? And I really want to highlight that we're all advocates, right? Whether we're doing that for ourselves, trying to figure out what's the best pathway to healing, or even on behalf of others, right? Even being an educator, sharing our experiences, that's really one way in how we can support each other and build this community of support. Thank you both. Okay, we'll go into our next question. So we've kind of already started talking about this, but I just want to state it, and then I'll put it in the chat as well for our audience members. But our next question is, what are some examples of skills and approaches that you have found best to address stigma and try to help yourself or your loved ones and community move toward that empowerment phase, right? How can we empower our community members while they're on their pathway to healing?
Shannon, you want me to go first, or do you want to go?
I can go first for this one.
You want me to go?
Either way. Yeah.
Okay. Um, so so again, I'm representing On Our Own in Maryland, and we have three set things to destigmatize. One is awareness, and this is just simply being aware of your stigmas, being aware that stigma is real, being aware that stigma prevents people. It will block people from actually getting the treatment that they need because they don't want to be judged, right? They don't want to be judged. They don't want to be unloved. As Shannon says, they don't want to be kicked out the friend group. So, so if people know that's going to happen to them, then they're not going to seek treatment. They're not going to get the help that they need, and they're not going to even admit it to themselves. So just aware that stigma is real. Is stigma harms, right? It harms, and it can make illnesses a lot worse. Also beware that we all stigmatize. I'm not the stigma police, right? I'm not going to sit here and say that I don't stigmatize, I've never stigmatized, or I don't do that anymore. We are all built, we have biases, all right? It's something that we grew up with, it's something that we've learned. Um, and so just admitting that we all have bias. And when you come across somebody that you want to label very harshly, I'm going to label you as whatever type of negative label. I would I wouldn't necessarily judge the thought. I tell people don't judge your thoughts and feelings. They are there for a reason, all right? Explore them. Why do I feel this way, right? Where did this come from? Why do I think everybody with depression is faking? That's because when I grew up, that's what my parents said, right? Why do I feel like everybody with schizophrenia is violent? Because these are the movies that I've watched. These are, every time they do a school shooting, that's what, this is what they're blaming, right? So this is mindfulness, like being really aware of your thoughts, and then while you have them. One of my favorite quotes is the illiterate of the 21st century is that it's not those who cannot read or write, but those who cannot learn, unlearn, and relearn. So I tell people, like, once we're aware of the thoughts, once we're aware of our stigmas, our biases, I'll give you an example. If I'm scared of a Hispanic man or a white man, I will explore that. Well, because this is what my parents told me grow up, or because I got robbed by a Hispanic man, 3 years ago. So it's a PTSD trigger, right? Just explore. Don't judge your actions, but don't judge your feelings and judge your thoughts. Um, so why do I do that? Why do I think like that? Get to the root of it. I tell people, seek progress, not perfection. And with self awareness, you must have self compassion. Um, and I always tell people, once you're aware of it, and then a lot of times I will have people think about how they really judge somebody. I can tell you 1,000 examples for me of how I've judged the LGBT community. I've judged different races. I can give you a whole long list that I am really that I can say I'm really ashamed of. But what I now tell myself versus drowning in guilt and shame is let moments and experiences teach us, not torment us. Right? Reliving and rehashing doesn't help. Growth is a direction. Growth is not a destination. So awareness is the first thing that we take. Being aware of yourself, of your stigmas, your biases, and then being aware that other people have them. The other thing that we go to, so I'll just give you the three. It's awareness, education, and contact. So education could be formal or informal. My goal is to replace ignorance with knowledge and judgment with compassion. I see a lack of compassion in a lot of people, but again, taking compassion could be a skill, right? Taking yourself out of your natural, being judgmental is natural, right? Because the brain goes toward the path of least resistance. And again, we have to make judgments every day to figure out, how we want to proceed in life. But take the time to sit back, try to say, do I need to pull back the layer of the onion? Could there be some, yes, this person's cussing me out. Like with my daughter, she cursed me out all the time. Evil. I was all types of names, nasty, bitch, stupid, all type of stuff. And I used to take it personal. I used to be like, "How dare you disrespect me? I'm your mother." I used to be the very typical black mother. I'll beat your, threaten all these types of beatings. But then once I realized she had a mental illness, I had to start saying, instead of me saying, "Oh my God, she's giving me a hard time," I had to reframe it and said, "She's having a hard time." All right. She's at her max capacity. She can't regulate her emotions right now. How can I help co regulate for her? I had to start learning those skills. These are all skills, people. None of this is intuitive. I tell people that all the time. So, for example, education could be formal, it could be settings like this. It could be informal. You can look at a webinar. You can, hear somebody's story. Um, that's one thing. Another thing I try to teach people on is language. We and at Honor Honor Maryland do a workshop called Language Matters. And I don't want to be like overly politically correct or have people, worry about, oh my God, there's something else that yet another um language that I have to memorize. But I want people to keep in mind that what we say and how we say could hurt somebody and could prevent them, right? Prevent them from seeking services. How we speak about people kind of shapes how we see them, and it also kind of shapes how we treat them. So, for example, research shows that when a provider called someone a substance abuser versus someone having a substance use disorder, they came to different conclusions about treatment, right? This is what the research shows. How we speak about people, we could come to different conclusions about how we treat them. And in a provider's circumstance, this is how they actually treat this person. Um, so they saw the person labeled as a substance abuser, as someone like a social threat, and they were deserving of more punishment, versus someone with a substance abuse disorder, they were deserving of treatment, right? And it makes sense, right? So when you're an abuser, it speaks to your character. You're an abuser. But when you have a disorder, it speaks to your medical condition, right? So it's a difference, and I'm seeing this now. Back in the 80s when it was the crack and cocaine epidemic, right? It was the war on drugs, and it was let's lock them up, let's have harsh punishments, let's do all this. But now with the opioid crisis, right now that it's a different demographic, it's a public health crisis. So now we're going to throw treatment at them. People who are addicted to opioids aren't locked up like people who were addicted to crack and cocaine, right? So how we label stuff and how we say stuff, it makes a difference in. I try to tell people this. It makes a difference in how we view it, how the doctors treat it, and then that goes into lawmaking, right? And how we should treat it, what we should do about it. So then it's contact, having a contact with somebody, and somebody like Shannon, like once you get to know them, once you see them, once you speak to them, it kind of all the pre-notions that you had about that disease, it could completely drop. So education, you can have all the education that you want, but looking at a video on how to cook a dish doesn't make you an expert chef, right? You have to actually go out there and practice it. And practicing it, um, for me, is speaking with people with mental illness, speaking with their caregivers, understanding what they go through, understanding their stigmas. So we usually say awareness, education, contact.
Thank you so much, Joy. That was very informative. I'm taking notes here to bring back with me in my work and in my community.
Yeah. I see Gloria. I said that she said when you're an abuser, it speaks to your character. So if you're a substance abuser, that speaks to your character. Versus if you're someone who is living with a substance use disorder, that speaks to your medical condition. Thank you.
Thank you, Joy. And thank you, everyone in the chat. Please, feel free to keep asking questions. We'll pass the mic to Shannon. So Shannon, what are some examples and skills or approaches that you found helpful, in addressing stigma and kind of moving towards empowerment?
Yeah, there are many, many, many things. I think I agree language is such a massive one, and just how we kind of frame talking about certain experiences. One that I would add is holding space for extreme states. I think that that is a really big one. Like sometimes when emotions are really big and really loud, it can feel hard to sit with that. And I think that, for myself, sometimes when I'm in my most difficult moments, it I would just say, like, don't underestimate the power of holding space for somebody who might be experiencing something like that. Sometimes that is enough, and that is extremely helpful. Is just to be with somebody as they're going through something like that. And kind of related to that, I would say, I know Joy brought this up too, but really leading with curiosity, asking people open-ended questions about their experiences, not assuming you might know what they mean. Anybody who you talk to who hears voices is going to feel completely differently about what that experience is like, right? It's going to be different in content. It's going to be different if it's internal or external, how the voice sounds, right? So the experience of psychosis is just about as unique to the person as it could possibly be. And so I think that really just asking those open ended questions and trying to understand somebody's experience as it is for them is often something that again is not to be underestimated. I think it can be much more heavily utilized. Something I think about a lot also is just accessibility of alternative supports for folks. So something like, for example, reality checking is something that typically is not taught in clinics or in support. And actually, somebody mentioned in chat the dogs. I absolutely use my dog all the time for reality checking. She's extremely friendly. She's not a trained service dog, but she's really friendly, and she'll go up to anybody who is in the room. So if I'm having visuals and I walk into a space and my dog doesn't go straight towards that thing, it's very easy to assume, okay, obviously that thing isn't there, right? So, but again, all of that is not something that we typically teach in clinics. I think also a lot of relational therapies, of course, no surprise, like, and also things like peer support. I'm a huge fan of something called compassion focused therapy, which basically teaches people, like, similarly how to kind of talk to voices and, coexist often with those voices. Art, like, just ways for people to really make meaning with experience, especially with things that might be really hard to describe in words. I think all of those things could really be something that we improve in service delivery and just kind of different ways of thinking about these experiences. Um, Also, just I touched upon this before, but truly not removing people from community, doing the best that we can to support people in spaces. And I think that that can extend to kind of like outreach and support in different types of spaces. One that I, of course, think about a lot is schools. But age of onset for schizophrenia is typically young adulthood or when somebody is in college. And so many, like most people, right, who have their onset of first episode psychosis are either in high school or in college. And so it to me just seems like extreme untapped potential that we're not offering more support in schools, both in kind of like education and awareness, but also in where we can direct people, and what the school can do for somebody who's experiencing psychosis beyond the kind of very cookie cutter list, right, of even like DRS accommodations that might be on a list. So I think there's a lot there. And the kind of last thing I would talk about is really doing more to kind of center lived expertise in both program design and also in research, and then in turn in policy. And when I say centering lived expertise, I really mean, like, roles not just being kind of performative or decorative, but like truly allowing people to really shape the kind of content, whether it's kind of training or policy, evaluation, program design, because that really shifts stigma itself, right, to really being a something rather than it being kind of individual. It then becomes something that we can really tackle at more of a structural level. And I think these are all things that we could be doing more of. And just much more kind of focus on relationality, relationships, and how can we kind of improve pipelines for people not just to be removed from community, but actually allow them to stay in space with their loved ones. I think those are all really big things that we could be doing more of.
Thank you so much, Shannon. We love to hear your experiences and kind of how you've also remained curious, right, with different approaches, different strategies on what works best for you. That's a takeaway I want to highlight. I think both Joy and Shannon really opened up about curiosity and exploration, right? Not every pathway, every skill, or every approach is going to work best for one person, or even when we're trying to support others, whether that's loved ones or maybe in our professions. So, really explore those options and really highlight again what Joy and Shannon mentioned, community. Community could look like getting connected with peers, right? People who are open to talking about their experiences, people who have those trained skills who are looking to educate others, and even having those natural supports, right? Who can you talk to if you find yourself in this situation? Kind of going back to earlier's question, sometimes we can get very different reactions, right? Depending on who we talk to, how much we disclose. And that's something that stigma also can really impact, especially as someone with lived experience, right? Do I feel comfortable sharing these many details with you at this moment? And it's okay not to, right? But that kind of goes into that being curious and exploring our boundaries, exploring our support systems, and really trying to figure out who is in our community. So that's something I really want to highlight, and I think both of you did a really good job showcasing that in your lived experiences and your advocacy journeys for yourself and for your loved ones. Just gonna check the chat for any other questions here. I see some other definitions of stigma. Thank you. And TikTok, yes. TikTok can be a good tool as well, I would think. Just be careful, not everything is gonna be real that you find on social media. So again, get connected with real organizations who are doing real work, and real people, right, who can sit here and have these types of conversations like we're having today. And let's see here. Okay, so just check the chat. Um, we're kind of wrapping up our discussion questions for our panelists. So, as we wrap up our conversation today, first, I just want to thank you all for your expertise and your bravery. It's not easy talking about the things we've gone through, even when, we're feeling confident and feeling resilient. In this current time, we still want to hold space and recognize that it took us time to get here, right? It took energy, effort, and bravery to really get to this point where we can share our journeys and share our support for our community. So, as we wrap up this conversation, I want to ask you both, what is something you want our audience to leave with today and bring back home to their communities?
I'll start. Thank you for the question. First, I want to give the definition of good mental health. And good mental health is your ability to adapt to new infirmities and new threats. This is the definition of good physical health, but it's the same thing for good mental health. So it's not the absence of disease, all right? Ideal mental health isn't the absence of stress, hardships, avoiding discomfort or challenging situations, but it's your ability to build on your capacities and handles what life throws at you. So that's the definition of resilience. It's adapting well in the face of adversity. So if your condition to handle life is, if your ability to handle life is conditioned on things being well, then and going smoothly, then you need to build your capacity. With that being said, with that definition, keep that in mind that you can have a mental illness but still be mentally well because you've built those resistance and you built those the tolerance. I also want people to keep in mind that mental illness, I'll repeat it again, is just that it's an illness. It's not a character flaw. It's not a moral failure. I also would encourage people to dig a little deeper, look past the troubling behavior, and kind of maybe have the assumption that behind the troubling behavior, emotions, thinking, are is a person with an unmet need, right? An unseen person, a fear, an underlying trauma, an underlying medical condition. Um, Another thing is that I don't think that people, again, I say we all stigmatize, but I don't think that people do it intentionally. Most of you here, I want to say all of you, but I'll say most to be on the caution. Don't wake up and say, how can I stigmatize somebody today? How can I add to somebody's trauma today? How can I make someone feel worse than they already are? Right? We don't intentionally think about that. We don't intentionally think that. But this is where mindfulness is, because when it comes to reducing stigma, the goal is to do no further harm. Don't poke at the wounds. Don't be dismissive. At the Anti Stigma Project, we always say you can have good intentions, but bad impact, right? Your intention of telling me that I should, my daughter, I should pray harder so my daughter could get the demon out of her. Your intention is good. Like, you don't want her to be sick, right? But you're having a bad impact. So I say there's good intentions and then bad impact. And once you become aware of it, don't just explain your intentions, but own your impact, right? And this is how we grow, and this is how we start to destigmatize. Echoing what Shannon said, research has shown this over and over and over again. The 10 times my child was hospitalized, the hospital kept telling me this: no one can recover alone. They need at least one supportive relationship. I'm not saying you have to have, a lot of people, but keep that in mind. It's hard to recover in isolation. And if you're supporting somebody with a mental illness, be aware of your triggers, your capacity, and your need for healing. Change is hard. I will say this again. With self awareness comes self compassion. Your brain is designed for efficiency, not for change. It clings to the familiar, even if it's destructive. So take small steps, be kind to yourself. I'm also a big fan of self care and boundaries. And I've learned with dealing with this space in this space that um, a lot of people will say, oh, my sister was traumatized, she has a mental illness and she completely abuses me, is that okay because she has a mental illness? And I always say, no, it's not okay for you to experience. I mean, her mental illness might be in her dysregulation, and the fact that she's not coping and she's not managing it might be an explanation, but that's not a justification for you to sit there and get abused. So I will tell people, learn self care, learn boundaries. Typically, I've seen that people can't heal for trauma unless they learn to show up for their own rescue, right? Um, I've tried to save someone from themselves, and it could be very exhausting, right? You could become collateral damage in somebody else's internal chaos. So this is why I say, that's probably one of the first steps if you want to go try to help somebody who has a mental illness. Just understand yourself and do some self care. But when it comes to stigma, I feel like these conversations, the more we talk about it, the better they are. I really, really believe in the role of the peer recovery specialist. I think it's the most vital role. When my daughter was in the hospital, the peer recovery specialist, not the physicians, not the psychiatrist, and not the therapist, it was the peer recovery specialist that helped her with her journey. So if you have a mental illness, somebody with a mental illness. I in one of the earlier uh, workshops that I was in, was the faith one. One lady said that when you go back and when you give to other people, that also helps your healing. And I totally agree. So start the conversation. Don't be afraid to have it. Hopefully, those are my takeaways.
Thank you so much, Joy. We appreciate your expertise. And Shannon?
Yeah, those are all amazing. Joy. I would just echo a couple of those as well. First off, mental illness is not an excuse to be a jerk. I'm telling people that often. It's like, just because you're in a bad place, it does not mean that you can be mean to other people. And I also just want to echo the point of the importance of self-care. If we're giving to others, we can't give to others if we're not giving back to ourselves and really allowing time to kind of restore. And I would also extend that to aspects of our own experience that we don't want to discuss, whether, whatever kind of positionality we're bringing as individuals, like making sure you know yourself and what you might not want to talk about. I mentioned, for example, have a diagnosis of PTSD. I don't discuss it. I know that for me, that is something that I cannot openly talk about, whereas psychosis is something I feel quite comfortable openly talking about, right? So I think just knowing our own boundaries and what we feel comfortable disclosing is something that's really important in kind of doing this type of work. And I would also just say no one is we can't reduce people to what we're seeing that is often their worst moments, whether that is something that we're seeing in the news or in the hospital or hearing from a doctor, seeing with one of our loved ones. I think it is really important to recognize that we are often seeing people in these really difficult moments. And so again, like not again, not allowing people to like walk all over you and be a jerk, but also just really giving back to yourself, practicing self-care, but also leading with kind of curiosity and making sure that we're understanding where people are coming from. To Joyce's point about peer support, also absolutely, peer support was certainly essential to my own healing and continues to be, both practicing and receiving it. And I think for everybody, talking to people who have had similar experiences to your own is always a really helpful thing. It's just really helpful to get more perspective. Um, and I would also, just say we can normalize the experience of psychosis as maybe not an extreme experience, but a human experience. Our brains trick us all the time. We have all had the experience of hearing our name called and it is not actually there, or hearing a bump in the night and thinking it's something scary. And so I think just normalizing that experience and recognizing that, like, it is all a spectrum, and how much we experience it is there is an aspect of that is very normal and very human for people to experience. And then I would just end, I guess, by saying be the change you want to see. Like, if there's something that is something that really needs to change or that you would love to see action around, I think most of us will be disappointed if we're waiting for somebody else to kind of take up the charge. And so just feeling empowered to really um, be the change that we want to see in the world, I think, is something that I get a lot of personal meaning out of. So those would be my kind of little thoughts.
Thank you so much, Shannon, for your expertise. I know I'm feeling very inspired. I just want to thank you both again for being here, sharing your experience journey, and really kind of giving us some gems, right, that we can take home with us, we can think about, and hopefully we can all incorporate into our professions along with our personal lives. Um, we do have time for a Q&A. So let's give a round of applause. I love to give flowers. Thank you so much, Shannon and Joy. And thank you to our conference host for inviting us to host this panel. Just one last reminder, please, please, please complete the evaluation. We love to hear your thoughts on how we did today, how you experienced this panel. And we can all be found on Hoover, our contact information. We're all on the app. So again, feel free to reach out to Joy, Shannon, and myself on there, and hopefully we can continue this conversation. So with that, we have about 10, 15 minutes for any reflective thoughts, any questions on our Zoom call today.
I would also like to say I just put a self-care quote in in the chat. Something I typically say all the time in regard when I do a self-care class.
Thank you so much, Joy. And thank you all for your support. I'm looking at the chat now. I'm seeing a lot of um, great thoughts here and compliments.
Thank you all.
And to the question, thank you, Patty, for answering it. Someone asked, will this be, available for folks to watch or listen to? It is recorded. So hopefully you'll have access to either a video or a transcript of our event, so you could take these words of wisdom, and expertise back with you.
Thank you all. If no one has any questions.
Thank you all so much for joining us. We look forward to seeing y'all at the rest of this conference.
And can I say one last thing? I didn't say it. I just said all my child's diagnoses, but I will say she is doing phenomenal. She's in
Okay.
recovery. She hasn't been hospitalized for a year, so she's doing really well
Yes.
despite the mental illness.
Love to hear that. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you. Enjoy the rest of the conference.